The next gentleman we want to study is probably one whose picture you will not recognize, but whose name you will. Now, maybe you'll surprise me and recognize immediately who this man is. His name really became well known in evangelical circles as a result of a publication that he was strategic in making in the middle part of the last century. So we'll get to that in just a moment. His name is C I Scofield. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Scofield Reference Bible. Uh, there are so many good translations out there that you are using. Some of you prefer the King James. Others of you like the English Standard Version, ESV. Some like the Christian Standard Bible, CSB, or NASB, the New American Standard Bible, or others like that. And they're all good translations. When I was saved back in 1974, it was pretty automatic that if you wanted to get a new, up-to-date Bible, you would get the Scofield Reference Bible. So I'm going to put that on hold for now. We'll come back and talk about that in just a little bit. But that's probably what the name C.I. Scofield most brings to mind when people see his name. But it's interesting to note that God used him in a number of ways, even beyond that. Now, he was born the same year that A.B. Simpson was born, 1843. Simpson passed away in 1919. Scofield passed away in 1921. Now, Scofield was from Michigan. Remember that A.B. Simpson was from Prince Edward Island in Canada. And so whether the two had knowledge of one another or not, I don't know. I'm going to suspect that they did because of something that we'll see in just a moment. Now, just a little sidelight. He was born in Michigan. I happen to be born in Toledo, Ohio, so I'm a Buckeye. I have a very close colleague here on campus who was born in Michigan, and we have a lot of fun together. I actually was saved in a church that was about 3 miles from the Michigan border in North Toledo. And so we had people in our church from Ohio and Michigan. And if you're at all involved in you like collegiate sports, you probably are aware of the ferocious Ohio State-Michigan rivalry that has been around for years and years and years. And at our church, we had a lot of fun with it. And my colleague and I still have a lot of fun with it today. But all that to say that C.I. Scofield was born in the state of Michigan. And his desire to serve God came later on because he was not saved as a young man. He had a military career, actually serving in the Confederate military. And you might say, well, wait a second. I thought he was from Michigan. Yes, he was from Michigan, but he ended up becoming involved in the Confederate military for reasons you can check out on your own if you would like to do a further study of his life. But that's what he did. But after the war was over, General Grant, who became President Ulysses S. Grant, actually invited him to serve on his cabinet. Part of the reason that Grant did that is because he really wanted to reunite the country. So by bringing into his cabinet people on both sides of the Mason-Dixon line, if you will, he was able to effect or at least encourage that restoration. And that's what happened in the case of Scofield. Now, just before I get to the Central American mission, Scofield had a serious drinking problem, and that really plagued him. He eventually came to Christ, I believe, during the time that he was serving in the cabinet of the President of the United States. I might be wrong on that, but it was somewhere in that vicinity. And so he had to deal with his drinking problem when he came to the Lord. And God, in his grace and mercy, gave Scofield the victory and enabled him to be a great servant in a number of ways. So you see here that one of the things that he was known for, even before we get to the Scofield Reference Bible, was the founding of the Central American Mission. Now, that's probably a mission agency that you haven't heard a lot about. Remember that a lot of mission societies or mission agencies have come and gone over the years, and that's okay. Mission agencies are designed to come alongside churches and help them, and sometimes they die natural deaths when their particular area or sphere of service no longer requires their resources. But he did found the Central American Mission and had a burden for reaching people in Central and Latin America. One thing that you probably should to note is that when missionaries began taking a serious look at Central and South America, they did face some criticism on the part of certain evangelicals and especially on the part of Catholics. Some Catholics and even broader evangelicals said, why should we go and re-evangelize a part of the world that has already received the gospel? And of course, the Catholic Church believed that Christianity was already well established there, and so you didn't need missionaries. And yet Scofield and others like him said, well, they may call it Christianity, but unless it's personal faith in the Lord Jesus Christ and complete abandonment to him and without trusting in our good works or accomplishments to save us, then it's not for real. And so they began to send missionaries. And my wife and I ended up serving in Brazil, in South America, in a land that is, even with the evangelical influence that is in Brazil today, is largely Roman Catholic in its religious makeup. And so the move toward Central and Latin America did meet some resistance, but praise God that despite that resistance, men like Scofield went through with these missionary movements. He also is known for founding the Philadelphia College of the Bible. Now today that's known as Cairn University, C-A-I-R-N. So if you look it up on the website, you can find a history of the school there on their site. And this makes me wonder if he had some interaction with A.B. Simpson. If not, I would guess that he probably at least was familiar with him because he was involved in the same type of work, living in about the same period of time as Simpson did. And he was also concerned about providing adequate Bible training. And so it began as an institute. And then later on in the late 50s, I believe it is, 1958, if I have the date correct, it became known as Philadelphia College of the Bible when it began to offer a bachelor's degree, the 4-year degree. And then in 2010 or 12, somewhere around there, the name was changed by the board of directors to Cairn University. And the reason given on the website was to dissolve this idea that they were a very narrow a school with a narrow focus of just training people for ministry. One of the things that I want to explain to you, when we talk about the condition of Bible colleges today and the fact that many have closed their doors, there are a lot of things that are going on that present challenges to Bible colleges today. One of them is that it seems that fewer and fewer young people are surrendering their lives to ministry. Now, I want you to be careful, not to commit the error that my generation can easily commit and look back at the good old days. When you're 60 years old, it's easy to look back and say, oh, I remember the good old days when ... Well, the good old days usually aren't nearly as good as we remember them being because we look at the past through what we call rose-colored glasses. I went to a Christian school that was a fairly, well-developed Christian school, and I graduated in a class of 32, and of those 32, only I and one other that I know of ever ended up in ministry. So, and I realize that's only one example, but that was a school under a church ministry that was very, very ministry-minded and placed a great emphasis on the call to ministry. And yet, relatively few people that attended the Christian school there ended up in what we call full-time or vocational Christian ministry. So, we need to be careful about, looking at the good old days and remembering how nice things were back then compared to today. But one of the things that some Bible colleges have tried to do over the years in order to survive is to broaden their course offerings, their program offerings, so that they can attract more students. So if you were strictly a Bible college at one time, and you're just not getting enough students to stay alive, you might start adding other majors in order to draw more students. Now, I'm not against that per se, but it does change the chemistry of your institution. When you start adding other majors, there's nothing wrong with those majors, and certainly nothing wrong with people who work in those fields. But it does change the on-campus chemistry, the culture of your campus, if you will, to a little something much broader than a vocational ministry focus. And so I'm not saying that those institutions were wrong for doing that. And in some cases, it enabled them to survive. In other cases, their constituents, those who supported them, said, no, this is not what we're here for, and this is not what we want. And they actually pulled their support, and the institutions ended up closing anyway. So I'm not trying to give you a bunch of stuff about Bible colleges today, but the fact is you're taking this course because you are enrolled in an online course in a Bible college. And I do think it's good for you to know something of the history of Bible colleges, and A.B. Simpson and C I Scofield give us some of that. So, Philadelphia College of the Bible, today, Cairn University. And I actually had a Brazilian friend that came from Brazil to study at Philadelphia College of the Bible and was still under that name, and then went back home to serve in Brazil. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, Scofield was known for the Scofield Reference Bible. Now, if you've never seen one of those, I would encourage you to find one. There were actually two versions, two editions. There is the original one called the Scofield Reference Bible, and then later on, some additions were made in the notes and even in the language of the text, and it was renamed the New Scofield Reference Bible. And that's the one that I received. I can still remember when my mother bought that for me shortly after I became a Christian. And it was one of the best gifts that I ever received from anybody. I used that Bible for years. The changes that they made were some of the notations. They added some notations. They kind of changed the way that they organized their notes to make it easier for the reader to follow and to study. They were both the old Scofield and the new Scofield were based on the King James Version, but the new Scofield changed some of the more archaic words to make it easier for reading. For instance, where Paul says to the Philippians, what I shall do, I wot not, W-O-T. Well, that's a word we don't use today, and so the Scofield Bible changed it to know not, K-N-O-W. What I shall do, I know not. Some of the these and thous were changed to you, and so on. And so that's the type of thing that happened that brought about the New Scofield Reference Bible. But I found it extremely helpful, full of notes. Nowadays, you can buy all kinds of study Bibles. There's an ESV study Bible. There's a Ryrie study Bible. There's the John MacArthur study Bible. You can buy the Trucker study Bible and the Homemaker study Bible. I mean, there's just about every kind of study Bible out there. And we thank God for that. And of course, you always have to keep in mind that notes in a study Bible are not inspired. Make sure that you don't just assume that because responsible scholars make this observation that it's necessarily true. Just keep in mind the distinction between what is inspired and what is added to in an attempt to help us understand the inspired text. So that's C.I. Scofield, and again, a man greatly used of God with quite a diverse background, and I think who deserves a place in our historical missions consideration.